Hey guys, we have two more chapters yet in our Storytime book, so we're going to go ahead and finish that up today. Um, I am just going to go right ahead and get started. So, first, the next chapter is called Working Together. The next day, I was pleased to see that Phoebe remembered her homework again. I was certainly glad I'd changed the cards to make her a homework collector. Holly seemed really happy being helpful all day long, especially because Mrs. Brisbane kept her busy. Slow Down Simon had slowed down quite a bit, because as door and line monitor, he had to wait for the rest of the students to line up. Hurry Up Harry was never tardy after recess or lunch because he had to leave when the other students did. And he was never late in the morning either. I guess the Iddos still hadn't figured out the living room clock was fast. Be careful, Kelsey was extremely careful when she handed Og out of his tank. Don't be scared, Og, she said. I'd never let anything happen to a special frog like you. Just Joey tidied up my cage again, even though it didn't really need it. When Mrs. Brisbane came to check on him, she told him he'd done such a good job. She'd let him train all future animal handlers. Joey was overjoyed. Did you hear that, Humphrey? He asked me later. I'm a trainer now, not just a handler. Mrs. Brisbane really trusts me. I could see Joey's job was doing him a lot of good. In fact, all of Brisbane's buddies seemed happy with their jobs, except two of them. Tall Paw and Small Paw had worked together to clear the bulletin board, but they still hadn't put anything up there. Mrs. Brisbane had taken out boxes full of art supplies and paper, maps and posters, but they just couldn't seem to agree on what to put up. Small Paw wanted to make the theme about autumn. Tall Paw wanted to make the theme about animals. Then Small Paw wanted the bulletin board to be about airplanes, and Tall Paw wanted it to be about cars. How about airplanes and cars? Transportation, Mrs. Brisbane suggested. The Paws didn't think those went together. I thought that the two Paws didn't go together. I had obviously made an unsqueakably bad mistake when I decided to pair them up. Mrs. Brisbane, I don't think Paul G and I make very good Brisbane's buddies, Small Tall told Mrs. Brisbane after lunch on Tuesday. Maybe you should switch us with somebody else. You have to learn to work with people who aren't like you, the teacher explained. You'll have to do it many times in your life. Small Paw looked miserable. He won't even try. And what about you? Are you trying? Mrs. Brisbane asked. Small Paw didn't answer. You can do it, Paul, I squeaked from my cage. Og tried to be encouraging, too. Boing, boing, he twanged. Mrs. Brisbane looked over at us. Look at those two. Can you think of two animals who are less alike than Og and Humphrey? That's right. He's an amphibian and I'm a mammal, I agreed. And yet, they share that table and actually seem to enjoy each other's company, Mrs. Brisbane continued. He's cold-blooded and I'm warm-blooded, I added. So I think two boys who are the same age and in the same class and both like things like planes and cars can learn to work together, don't you? Mrs. Brisbane certainly made sense to me. I guess, Paul said. He didn't sound convinced, though. So give it another try, Mrs. Brisbane told him. For Humphrey and Og, okay? I crossed my toes and hoped they'd try. They did have a chance to work together later in the day, but they didn't talk at all. They just stared down at the boxes of art supplies. Something I hadn't planned for happened next. Mrs. Brisbane asked Holly to return some playground equipment to Mrs. Wright. There were several bats and a box of balls. Helpful Holly had a little trouble carrying them all at one time. The bats crashed to the ground, the box tipped over, and the balls bounced all over the floor. She picked them up, then admitted she needed some help. Would you like to ask someone else to help? Mrs. Brisbane asked. Holly looked around the room, and I almost fell off my tree branch when she picked Rolling Rosie. The smile on Rosie's face told me she was pleasantly surprised. I can carry the box on my lap, Rosie suggested. You can take the bats. Good idea, said Holly. After they had left, Mrs. Brisbane told the rest of the class, That's what I like to see in my classroom. Working together. That's why I came up with Brisbane's buddies. Small Paul glanced at Tall Paul when he heard those words. I couldn't hear him, but he said something to Tall Paul, who nodded. Soon they were actually talking as they pulled things out of the box. A little later, Small Paul asked, "Mrs. Brisbane, could we borrow your pictures of the kids in the class and go to the library? We need to scan them into the computer." She was surprised, but of course she said yes and wrote a note to Mr. Fitch, the librarian. The Pauls were both smiling when they came back. After school, Mrs. Brisbane seemed unspeakably pleased with herself. Just before she left, she came over to our table to say goodbye. "Brisbane's buddies seem to be working out," she said, "even though I'm still not sure how those cards got switched around." "Did Aldo do it?" She laughed. You wouldn't tell on him if he did, which was true. The next morning, Small Paul and Tall Paul, together, asked Mrs. Brisbane if they could put up their bulletin board during recess. "Yes," she said. "I just hope Mrs. Wright doesn't find out. She wants all students to get fresh air." Tall Paul laughed, ran over to the window, opened it, and took a deep breath. "There, I've gotten my fresh air." Small Paul raced over and did the same thing. "Me too," he said. Then they returned to the bulletin board. "I made a plan," Small Paul said, showing Tall Paul a piece of paper. I was glad to hear someone else in room 26 made plans besides just me. Tall Paul studied it carefully. "That should work," he said. "I guess I'll take the top part." "Okay," Small Paul replied. "I'll take the bottom." I climbed up to the tippy top of my cage to watch as the bulletin board magically came to life. Tall Paul put up letters across the top reading, "Brisbane's buddies, we work together." Meanwhile, on the lower half of the board, Small Paul put up pictures of students Mrs. Brisbane had taken on the first day of school. The boys had enlarged them on the computer and printed them out. He put them in pairs according to their jobs. Next, Tall Paul put pictures on the upper half of the board. When they got to the middle, they worked together and didn't seem to mind one bit. They worked quickly in order to finish before recess ended. "Now add the drawings we did last night," Tall Paul said. Soon, the job titles were accompanied by drawings the boys had made depicting each job. For animal handlers, there were excellent drawings of Og and me. Suddenly, I had an awful thought. "They won't need 2 animal handlers if they move one of us to room 18, I told Og. Og splashed loudly in his tank. They were angry kinds of splashes. By the time the other students in the room returned, the bulletin board was finished and it looked great, great, great. All the kids seemed to enjoy putting their pictures on the board. I enjoyed having mine up there too. But what I really enjoyed was seeing that my plan worked after all. Small Paul and Tall Paul walked out of the classroom together at the end of the day, talking about getting together with their planes and cars. I don't think either of them noticed that they weren't the same size. "Whew," I said when Og and I were alone again. "We did it, but it was a lot of work." "Boing, boing, boing," Og agreed. Aldo came in later to clean the room. "I'm glad to see you two are still together," he said. "Richie told me that Miss Becker said she decided on which classroom pet she wanted." My tummy did a flip-flop. "Which one of us is it?" I squeaked. "She said it would be a surprise," Aldo added as he swept under our table. "She'll tell them tomorrow. Oh, and she said Miss Mack helped her make up her mind." My tummy did a somersault. Miss Mack loved me. So of course she told Miss Becker to pick me. I still missed my old friends from last year, so why did I feel sad about leaving room 26? Aldo spent a long time in our classroom that night, because he brought in stacks of extra chairs and left them in the corner. "Mrs. Brisbane said she's going to need these tomorrow," he explained. Why did Mrs. Brisbane need more chairs? Was she going to get more students? If so, wouldn't she need a helpful classroom pet more than ever? Later, I made a few more notes in my notebook. Reasons I'm sad about leaving room 26. Leaving Mrs. Brisbane. Leaving Og. Leaving my new classmates just when I'm starting to like them. I opened the lock that doesn't lock and strolled over to Og's tank. "Og, old friend, I think I'm going to be leaving room 26, I said, even though I don't want to. Og bounced up and down so hard, I thought he'd pop the top of his tank. Boing, boing, boing. "I'm sure you'll still help the students with their problems," I said, "and I'll come visit you every night." Og calmed down a little then. "Maybe Mrs. Brisbane will bring another pet in to keep you company. A cold-blooded animal like you. I thought that would make him feel better, but I don't think it did." He dived into the water side of his tank, splashing furiously. I understood. I went back to my cage, but I didn't sleep much that night. My last night in room 26. Humphrey's rules of school. Work together, please. Now we're ready for the last chapter, chapter 15. The best class in the world. I was on edge all morning. Everything in class was running smoothly now, and suddenly the new students of room 26 didn't seem so strange anymore. Too bad I'd be leaving so soon. I tried to shake and wiggle my worries away, but this time it didn't work. I waited and waited and waited to get the bad news, but nothing happened until after lunch, when Miss Becker came in, accompanied by Richie and Gail. They were smiling, naturally, because they were happy they were getting me back. Mrs. Brisbane, your students from last year wanted to share some news with you. Do you have a minute? Miss Becker asked. Mrs. Brisbane looked surprised, but she said, Sure, if you can share the news with my whole class. Miss Becker smiled. Yes, of course. She turned toward the class. Mrs. Brisbane's students from last year wanted to get a classroom pet, she told the class. Of course, they missed Humphrey and Og. So I've finally made a decision. Richie and Gail, would you like to announce it? Hermit, Richie said, stepping forward. That didn't sound like my name at all. Crabs, Gail said, giggling. That didn't sound like Og's name either. What? Mrs. Brisbane looked amazed. We decided on something completely different. 6 hermit crabs, Miss Becker said. It was Miss Mack's suggestion. Wonderful, Mrs. Brisbane said. How did you choose them? We decided there would never be a frog as great as Og, Richie said. Or a hamster as perfect as Humphrey, Gail added. I wasn't sure if that was true, but it was nice to hear. And, Miss Becker added, hermit crabs are very quiet, but they do better if they live in groups. I hope you enjoy them as much as we enjoy Humphrey and Og, Mrs. Brisbane said. Perhaps we'll come and visit them someday. But at the end of the day, before she left, Mrs. Brisbane said, You notice it takes 6 hermit crabs to replace the 2 of you. That made me feel very, very, very good. Phew, that was a close call, Og, I told my neighbor when we were alone again. I was unspeakably delighted that I'd be staying in room 26. After all, someone needed to keep a close eye on Kelsey to make sure she didn't have any accidents. Joey wouldn't get to hear me giggle if I weren't around. Harry's family clock would be set back at any time. I still wanted to find out why Phoebe was so forgetful, and I wasn't sure yet whether all of Thomas's stories were real or just tall tales. I had a second surprise later that afternoon when Miss Mack appeared at the door. Are you ready? She asked. Come on in, Mrs. Brisbane said. I guess I'd been dozing when Mrs. Brisbane had announced what was going to happen. Suddenly my classmates were arranging the spare chairs stacked in the corner and setting them next to their own chairs. Then I was surprised when Miss Mack and her entire class of first graders entered the room. Miss Mack directed each of the first graders to sit next to an older student. The idea behind Brisbane's reading buddies is that the older children will share their favorite books with the younger children, Mrs. Brisbane told them. Any questions? A small boy who was missing both of his top front teeth raised his hand. What's over there? He asked, pointing toward the table Og and I shared. Why, that's our hamster Humphrey and our frog Og, Mrs. Brisbane explained. Hi, 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 I squeaked, which made most of them giggle. Maybe you'll be in this class someday, and they'll be your classroom pets, Mrs. Brisbane said. That seemed to please the first graders. It pleased me, too. What pleased me even more was watching the students in my class patiently sharing books with the first graders and helping them learn to read. How on earth could I have ever thought they were the worst class in the world? The third surprise of the day came just before school was over for the day. Principal Morals stopped by for a visit. He was wearing a tie with colorful autumn leaves on it. Class, I just want to say that Mrs. Brisbane has told me that in the last few weeks, your class has improved more than any class she's ever had. Mrs. Brisbane has been teaching for a long time, so that's quite a compliment. Mr. Morals paused and smiled at the class. She said you made special progress in learning to work together, he continued. So I would like to congratulate you and encourage you to keep up the good work. Every face in room 26 had a smile on it, even mine. After school, Mrs. Brisbane hummed to herself as she gathered up her papers and her purse. Fellows, this has been quite a week, hasn't it? It's the kind of week that makes me glad I'm still teaching, she said. That was nice to hear because I didn't want Mrs. Brisbane to stop teaching. Ever. I still have to decide who takes you home this weekend, Humphrey, she said. It will have to be a surprise. I didn't mind being surprised. The new students in room 26, who had seemed like strangers a few weeks ago, all felt like friends now. That was a very nice feeling. When Aldo came into the room that night, the first thing he said was, "Hermit crabs." He laughed so hard his mustache shook. I never would have guessed she'd pick hermit crabs. No, I didn't know. Oops, sorry. I never would have guessed she'd pick hermit crabs. They're crustaceans, you know. No, I didn't know, I told Aldo, but it doesn't matter whether they're crustaceans or primates or amphibians. They're classroom pets, and I'll bet they'll do a very good job. Of course, I couldn't resist the temptation to pay a visit to room 18 after Aldo's car had pulled out of the parking lot that night. But as I slid under the door of Miss Becker's classroom, I was a little nervous. What if hermit crabs were as unfriendly as George? I looked at the table by the windows, but there were only stacks of folders there. An eerie glow from another wall caught my attention, and there on a table was a large aquarium with a small light on it. I inched closer and looked up at the unspeakably odd sight of the hermit crabs. They weren't golden and furry like me, and they weren't green and googly-eyed like Og. They were pinkish and shiny and had pincers on them that I wouldn't like to come in contact with, but I have to admit they were interesting. "Welcome to Longfellow School," I said, even though they probably couldn't understand me. "I hope you know that you're in one of the best classes in the world." They just kept wiggling, so I continued, "And I'm in one of the other best classes in the world." Since they didn't have anything to say, I turned away, but before I left the room, I turned back. "By the way," I squeaked, "my name is Humphrey. I'm the hamster in room 26. I'm not completely sure, but I think one of the hermit crabs waved to me. I waved back. Once I was back to my classroom, I told Og about the hermit crabs. "I guess it's nice that they're all crustaceans," I told him, "but personally, I'd rather have an amphibian as a neighbor. It makes life more interesting." "Boing, boing, boing," he said, which made me think he was happy to share the table with a rodent. I took out my little notebook and I finished my poem, writing in the moonlight. "Autumn, oh autumn, you had my poor head spinning, but now I am happy to have a new beginning." Humphrey's Rules of School. Love the class you're in. I do. All right. So that is our full book, School Days of Humphrey. And we are finished. Finished with story time. So thank you for listening and have a happy rest of your day. I'll see you in a couple days.